So we take a little different angle on it, where we approach the history.
From a purely selfish standpoint, I kind of like the Electoral College because in some places, Oregon would be a battleground state, and then I might live in a place where people would pay attention. Oregon, with 3.5 million people, was not, you know, you're just not going to see very much attention paid, and that just doesn't mean presidential coming. What matters? What's important in Oregon? Natural resources, jobs, or you can look at California and see 50 million people and go, you know what? I don't need to pay any attention to those people in Oregon. That's chump change compared to those people down there.
But if you just had the popular vote counting, then every vote would be equal to every other vote, and people would go everywhere, not just the battleground states.
And that's kind of what I
No,
was
but they wouldn't. I mean, why would you go to North Dakota ever?
They wouldn't go to Hawaii or Alaska.
My vote in North Dakota is worth as much as your vote.
Well, but I can go to California and I can be guaranteed as a candidate that I'm going to see 2 million people. And if I spend 10 times as much time in North Dakota, I can't see 1/10 those people.
Okay, so, well, and with that ideology you have, okay, so if you, let's say, hypothetically, there was a stadium large enough and speakers loud enough to where you could get every Californian to hear exactly what Obama had to say. I mean, I can say without any doubt that not every one of those people, even hearing what he had to say, even if he gave them all a free pen, would vote for a specific candidate. You know what I'm saying? So by creating this, this electoral vote system, or this electoral votes where, where the people are misrepresented by land. I mean,
there's an aspect of that. The idea is that not just people, but the interests of different parts of the country matter.
Yeah.
So there is an aspect to that. Yeah. I'm not a fervent supporter of it. There's a reason for it. It's not just an anachronism of the Constitution.
And I'd just like to say one more thing. It's just that if you were to say, that, okay, well, then no one would go to those states. Okay, so let's say,
And not just go to the states, but pay attention to the things that matter in those places.
Okay. So you have person. Oh, I'm sorry. So you have person A who says, okay, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to go to Texas and Florida. That's it. I'm going to spend all my money in those states. Then the other person could say, okay, well, I'm going to go to every one of the other states, and you know what I'm saying? So those states still would matter. Those votes still would matter because you could. Okay, so 2 for 1. That guy visits, I mean, it's all a measure of, I guess, percentages. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so you take that population with the one state of, I can't remember, you said that no one would go to.
North Dakota.
North Dakota and South Dakota. Let's say that North Dakota and Alaska. You put them together, maybe, and you get more like a Washington. I don't know the actual numbers, but you see what I'm saying? As opposed to, person A goes to those 3 states.
Well, the problem is the way politics are done now. They're mostly done through the media and through enormous, incredibly expensive media buys and media markets. And for example, in New York, you can make a media buy in New York and you have Philadelphia, New Jersey, Boston, and just about everywhere else. In the West, you have to make media buys in Oregon in 4 different markets just to get the state of Oregon.
I guess I would just like to see the president acknowledge that he works for me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if he doesn't want to spend the time to come and speak with me or speak with my people, then you have a certain amount of people who would just say, okay, well, I'm not going to vote, which may not be very
happens.
Exactly, because now, as it stands now, people are misrepresented by this electoral college. I mean, and what I mean by misrepresented is, on an individual basis, they're not receiving the same amount of push as their equal counterpart.
And that may become a constitutional issue.
I'm sorry.
That needs to be responded to in the context of contemporary.
I'm kind of lost.
I'm just going to give a couple other people opportunities.
Other than the Electoral College, what other changes do you see coming to the Constitution? What other amendments?
Should or what?
Should.
I think you should have a 1-term, 6-year presidency. I think you should take away incumbency. Look what it does. I mean, everybody just runs for office. I think 2 years for Congress is insane. All they do is dial for dollars and run for office constantly. I think so. I think if you had a 1 6-year presidency, Now, admittedly, then what if you're stuck with a ringer? Impeachment is an extreme. It's sort of like it's the national equivalent of recall, except it's done through the Congress. And unless you make Congress more responsive, I think you have to find some way to make running for Congress more competitive. You have to be a millionaire to run for the United States Senate now, period. The only reason you're having a race in Oregon right now is because the Democratic Senatorial Committee has targeted Oregon as the most likely state to switch from R to D. And so if you see the ads for Merkley, who I will, in full disclosure, I support and I've endorsed, you'll see that they're not paid for by Merkley. They're paid for by the Democratic Senatorial campaign committee. Because millions of dollars are being poured because this is a state that can flip.
Thank you.
So with there being a 2-term limit on presidency but no term limit on congressional service, do you think incumbency in the legislature is a larger problem than in the executive branch with corporate dollars and all the influences that have obviously affected that branch of the government?
There was a big movement a few years ago. I lived in California for a long time, and they passed term limits there on the legislative, and it seemed to give more power to the executive, even though there was, I think, a 2-term limit on the governor. The problem that's often brought up about term limits is that some of the most capable people who have acquired knowledge of the system over a period of years are defeated, have to retire. And you get people who are relative novices, and that tends to increase executive power. Your legislative power, if people don't know how to work legislation, and it's a pretty, complex process, this whole process of legislation, you get all these novices. I think term limit, to a certain extent, I generally support the 2-term amendment for the presidency, which was put in there by Republicans after FDR was elected 4 times. But I generally support that because there is a problem of really accruing of the possible dictatorial power in the presidency, especially these days.
I've got to call 1 minute.
All right, I'm just going to finish up. But I think in the legislative, we have to be really careful of term limits.
Well, I find myself voting against perhaps some of my own ideals and stuff as an Oregonian to keep people in power longer because they do represent us well in Congress, and they don't agree with my ideals, but they do represent Oregon better. And so I find myself voting against what I believe in order to try to protect Oregon, which is what I see as the paradox.